Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective here. In this video, we're going to talk about a new translation that I heard about recently called the Berean Study Bible. One of my viewers asked me about this translation because they're very excited about it, they said. And I noticed looking online that there does seem to be a lot of interest and excitement and curiosity about this new Bible translation. So I am going to talk a little bit about it in this video. I reached out to the producers of the translation and they kindly sent me a copy for review. So I'm going to talk about the translation a little bit, what it is, its background, and also take a look at the physical copy that they sent me. So this translation does have a very nice website, bereanbible.com. And what is interesting about this translation, it's called the Berean Study Bible, but it's actually one of a few different variations on this Berean Bible translation. So the Study Bible you can see here is the first one. They also have a Berean Literal Bible, a Berean Interlinear Bible, and a Berean Annotated Bible. Now these are not all yet fully completed, but the Berean Study Bible is fully complete online and in print form. Some of these translations are available, at least in part, online. So to understand this translation's approach, you really have to see the Berean Study Bible as part of an ecosystem of different variations or iterations of the Berean Bible, which is a really neat concept. So they do have some different editions of the physical print copy of the Berean Study Bible available on their webpage. And they have a couple of hardcover editions as well as a couple of imitation leather editions. The one they sent me, I think they call this a burgundy imitation leather soft. I'm not sure what the term they use, but it's some sort of a synthetic leather cover. And they call it burgundy, but to be very honest with you, I would not call this burgundy, and I have had that affirmed by other people online who've looked at this, and they also are of the opinion that it's not really burgundy. It is much more of a brown color. And I'm pretty sure I recently heard Scott Shirley talking about a Zondervan New American Standard Bible recently that they called burgundy, and he was looking at that copy and he said that one was also not burgundy.
Which one of these two is burgundy? That's burgundy. This is not burgundy.
So I don't know what the confusion is about the color burgundy, but apparently a lot of us have a different perception of what burgundy is versus what the publishers are calling burgundy. I have a feeling, though, it just has to do with when they produce it, their intention is to produce it in burgundy, but then the manufacturer ends up coming up with a little bit different color. Anyway, this is what they're calling the burgundy cover, but it's more of a brown color. It is nicely stamped on the front here with Holy Bible and Berean Study Bible. The spine is very simple. You just have BSB on the side here stamped. It is perimeter stitched. It does have a yellow ribbon, very simple ribbon, nothing special, hardly long enough really for this Bible. And the cut on the end here isn't so great either. But I do like the color scheme. It is a yellow ribbon. It also has yellow head and tail bands. And there is no art gilt on the edges. It is just white page there on the side. The inside of this Bible has kind of a paper paste down, I guess I would call it. It's like a thick paper here, yellowish color. And then it has the title page. Copyright information. This is published by Bible Hub in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It does say it is printed in the USA, so that makes a lot of people happy. That's, I guess you could call that the positive side. The downside is that the quality of this edition isn't necessarily the nicest quality. I mean, there are Bibles printed in China that are actually much nicer than this, but I know a lot of people prefer to have a Bible that is not printed in China. And so this is printed in the USA, which makes a lot of people happy. I have heard that the paper on this is like a 45 GSM paper, which in a way is nice. It's nice, kind of hefty feeling. It doesn't seem flimsy, but the Bible is definitely on the heavy side, I can tell you. When you're holding it, it's a pretty hefty feeling Bible. It's also pretty wide, so it's a pretty large Bible actually, and it's called a study Bible, but as we look at the text, you'll see it's not like study notes really, and yet it's still a pretty big Bible even though it's mainly just text. So here are the table of contents, Old and New Testament. You have a preface to the BSB. And then over here it talks about publication and sharing. So aside from the tiers of translation, that ecosystem that I was talking about, one of the other unique features of this translation is that it is trying to be very accessible and able to be freely used by people. And so it says here, we desire to share a Bible text that is as free as possible from licensing and publishing constraints. So they really want to make this available for ministry purposes. People can use it, and from what I understand, they wouldn't have to pay money to use it in their materials. So that is really nice. They give a lot of very generous permissions to people. And again, you see the different websites for the different iterations of this Bible, the different translation tiers. And this talks in detail about the tiered translation structure. It says an interlinear Bible to directly follow the Greek and Hebrew texts, a literal translation to take the reader to the core of the Greek and Hebrew meanings, a modern English translation effective for public reading, memorization, and evangelism. So this Berean Study Bible is this particular tier here, the modern English translation. And they're saying that it's for these purposes here that you have this Berean Study Bible edition. And then also there is an emphasized translation to bring out the full meaning and intensity of the original text. So I haven't seen anything online where that's available yet, that emphasized translation, but I guess from what I can tell, it might be something more like an amplified Bible. So we'll see what that looks like when that actually comes out. But the other translation tiers that are talked about here, the interlinear, the literal translation, the modern English translation, you can actually at least read parts of those, at least the New Testament you can read online for all of those. And again, the Study Bible, the modern translation here, the whole thing is available online and in print. Talks about the Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic sources and abbreviations. So this page is looking at the textual basis for this translation. And then you get into the biblical text. And a lot of people really like this format, and looking at it myself, I have to agree there's a lot to like about the way that they have formatted this page. First of all, the font is a pretty good size. It's not a huge font, it's not particularly large, but it's a good size font. And I think one thing that makes this so readable is it has really good line spacing. And so that is really nice. As you can see, it does have section headings at different places. It's also in paragraph format with verse numbers, and the verse numbers look pretty bold and easy to find, but that paragraph format looks really good. It does have footnotes on the bottom, and where you see this is a little bit more of a study Bible is these aren't just translator notes. I think there are a lot of translator notes, but there are also some extra things here, like you see it says this footnote A, cited in 2 Corinthians 4:6. So one thing I like about this Bible is even though it doesn't have like a ton of cross-references, it doesn't have a cross-reference suite on the bottom or in the center column, you will see different places in the footnotes as well as under the section headings where they have cross-references, other places in the Bible that tie in with the passage that you're looking at. So you see that here on the seventh day of creation. You also have these references here in other parts of the Bible. A lot of good translator notes from what I can see here. And again, this paper is pretty thick, so I'm not seeing a lot of ghosting. A lot of Bibles today have very thin paper, so a lot of people do like the fact that this has nice thick paper, which is nice for writing in and also doesn't have, as I said, a lot of ghosting. I don't think it's line matched though, but that's not really a problem as long as you don't have a lot of show through. So this gives you a taste of what the formatting, the typeset of this Bible is like. I think it looks very nice. When you are in poetry, they do have that poetic setting there, so you can see the stanzas, and that is also really nicely done. When we get to the end of the Old Testament and into the New Testament, there's no New Testament title page, and I don't think there was an Old Testament title page. Some Bibles do have that, but this one, when you get into the New Testament, you'll see that it is a black letter text for the words of Christ. And a lot of people actually like that because red letter, it can be hard for some people to read. It can kind of mess with their eyes. So black letter text is actually very nice for a lot of people. When you get to the end of the Bible here, you will see also after Revelation a table of weights and measures. So they are converting the biblical units, the measurement units that are found in the text, with modern units of measurement. So I believe that when you're reading the text, you are going to see things like cubits to measure the length of something as opposed to feet. And maybe in the footnotes, I believe I saw that in the footnotes, they may have a foot equivalent measurement, but in the text, they are using the biblical original language measurements from what I can tell. Now, one question a lot of people are going to have is, what kind of translation philosophy is the Berean Study Bible? Is it more of a literal translation? Is it more dynamic? Where does it fall on the spectrum there? And what they're saying, according to their website, is that the Berean Study Bible is in between the English Standard Version and the Christian Standard Bible. Now, some of that is subjective, a matter of how you look at it. Some of those charts aren't always super accurate, and sometimes I've noticed it is a matter of opinion and how you choose to look at the data. So you can take that for what it's worth, but they are basically saying it is more on the literal side. However, it is not a highly literal translation. They're trying to make it more adaptable to the English language, more understandable for English readers, and also, I would say, trying to make sure it reads like good English. But again, they do have the literal Bible tier in their ecosystem. So if you want something that's very literal, you can go to their Literal Bible website and read that. But the Berean Study Bible is a little bit more in between. Still, from what I can tell, very literal. The other interesting thing about it is they are calling it a new translation. However, looking at it, I can tell that they're still sticking with a lot of traditional renderings, at least from what I've seen. And what jumped out at me is even in Psalm 23 here, it actually says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters." So just that initial phrasing there, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." I mean, that just basically sounds like the King James Version. So from what I can tell, it is modern and it isn't highly literal or super literal, but it is more traditional in many ways. So you will notice that when you're reading in the biblical text and it's referring to God, it does actually have capitalized pronouns for the sake of His name, so that His is capitalized. Your rod and your staff, and they capitalize that your there. Another example of more traditional wording in this Bible is in John 3:16, where it says, "For God so loved the world." Now, it does go on to say that He gave His one and only Son. It doesn't say only begotten there. However, in the footnote, it does say or only begotten or unique, also verse 18. So they are acknowledging that as a way to translate it as only begotten. But overall, it still sounds a lot like the King James Version, "For God so loved the world." A lot of new translations now are starting to move towards something like "God loved the world in this way." So overall, I haven't done a super deep assessment of this translation. Obviously, I've only had it for a few days, and I only have really preliminary remarks to make on this. But from what I can tell, If you like something that's more like the New American Standard Bible or the English Standard Version, you'll probably like this Bible. In some ways, the formatting is kind of a mix between the New American Standard Bible and the English Standard Version, and even the NIV. But I would put it as, from what I can tell, more of a traditional translation. And when you are reading, for example, in the New Testament, and Paul is talking here to the church in Romans chapter 12, it says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers." A lot of newer translations are adding "and sisters" to make that clear in English that he's not only talking to men, but the more traditional translations, the older translations, would just put brothers, and so that's what you see here. So it seems to be a pretty conservative translation from what I can tell. I think that's a good way to describe it. I will say, though, that I would like there to be more information given about the translation team. They do talk about Bible Hub and I think the Discovery Bible Project, but they don't have a lot of really clear information as to who the translators are from what I've seen or what their affiliations are. Now, I realize that identifying a Bible translation with a certain denomination, for example, will put a thought in some people's mind as to what kind of a translation it is, and it could even be a turnoff for some people. So if they think it's a Presbyterian or a Baptist translation, they may say, well, I don't really want something that has bias to it. However, if you don't know who the translators are and what their affiliations are, it can be sometimes hard to trust the translation. So I think it's always better to be as transparent as possible. There are groups out there, for example, that put translations, and there's not a lot of them that I've seen, but there are some translations that are really more associated with sectarian and even cult groups. So, for example, the New World Translation is associated with the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're the ones that produce it. So it is good to know the background of the translation, even if they just said something like it is an interdenominational group of people that put this translation together. That could be helpful. But overall, from what I can see, it looks to be a good translation. I know a lot of people would say, well, we don't really need yet another English Bible translation, and to that I would have a lot of agreement. However, I will say I do appreciate the fact that they're putting this out there with that ecosystem of different variations of this Bible translation. So it's a really good tool. It's online and it's very accessible. And again, their licensing is very generous. So you can use this in your ministry, in your print materials at, from what I understand, no cost. They will give you permission to do that. So that is really wonderful. And I do like having a translation that does all those things. And the fact that it is a little bit more on the literal side, but not slavishly literal, I think is also a really good thing. The only downside right now as far as print copies is they're very limited as far as the editions that are available. And yes, it is printed in the USA, but it's not necessarily the nicest text block in the world. It's definitely fine, very usable, but it's not the greatest text block in the world either. So as a translation just getting off the ground, I think it's off to a great start. And I think it's going to grow in interest. I don't know that it will ever get to the level of something like the New International Version or the King James Version, but I do think it is going to be a great tool available for people in churches and ministry. So if you have any other questions about this Bible translation, leave them in the comments below. If you have opinions that you'd like to share, I'd like to also hear your opinions in the comments. But thank you so much for taking a look at this translation, this overview, as well as a little bit of a review of this Bible brought to you from A Frisch Perspective.